When the machines that once symbolized America suddenly stopped. When one of Boeing's large factories in the United States quietly shut down. You know something's not right. Boeing, the legendary aircraft manufacturer and an icon of American industry, is planning to move some production overseas to cut costs. And it's not just a few technical details, but potentially the entire production lines in Seattle and South Carolina, which once created tens of thousands of jobs. This is not just the story of a corporation. But the bigger question is, are we entering an era where America no longer produces for itself? In this video, we'll explore what really caused Boeing to leave the production line in the US. Why does the reaction from the US say it all? And what awaits America after this departure, not just of a business, but perhaps of an entire idea made in America? This video is independently analytical and based on publicly available information. It does not represent any individual organization or political trend, but only to raise important questions about the future of American manufacturing. Let's get started. In Everett, Washington, people used to say if you hear the hum of machinery, it's the heartbeat of America. But in early 2025, that heartbeat suddenly stopped. There was no solemn declaration, no grand press conference. It was just a few lines of leaked internal documents, and then economic journalists suddenly turned their attention to Mexico all at once. Boeing, a symbol of American industrial might, is quietly planning to move part of its production line south of the border. Within just a few months, some fuselage components, wings and electronics appear to be starting to be assembled at new factories located in Monterrey. The city, known for its beer and football, is now building airplanes for the United States. And when the numbers started to come out, people were truly shocked. Labor costs in Mexico were only 1 times 6 of those in the US. Preferential taxes and shipping costs up to 35% lower. And the final blow, Boeing could save nearly $500 million annually. The CEO of Boeing did not shy away. He appeared on CNBC and shared globalization is no longer an option. In a volatile world, that's a matter of survival. For many Americans, that saying makes them reflect. Because Boeing is not just a business. It was once the wings of America, carrying the president on Air Force One, bringing American soldiers home from the battlefield and carrying the dreams of industrialization reaching for the stars. Now, those very wings are flying south. Meanwhile, to the north, Canada is quietly observing and smiling, because while the US is grappling with tax policies, debates, and corporate impacts, Canada is quietly signing a series of stability agreements with international corporations, including some of Boeing's suppliers. While the US is erecting tariff barriers, is Canada rolling out the red carpet for fleeing supply chains? And then a question that many people are asking right now. When corporations like Boeing, once considered a national treasure, choose to pull out of the United States, what is really changing? Are we witnessing the end of the era where corporations and nations are one? And this is just the beginning. In the next part, we will see that the anger of the White House head is not just in words, but has become a political order, causing the entire global supply chain to falter. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because in the next part, we'll explore why a tax decree can permanently trap billions of dollars worth of aircraft. Back in 2017, when he appeared among the gleaming Boeing aircraft at a factory in South Carolina, the then head of the White House declared to thousands of workers, "We are going to bring back jobs. We will bring production back to the US." And Boeing is proof of that. That saying once echoed like a vow, a beautiful image made in America, America soaring high, and the American working class will no longer be left behind. But now, as Boeing quietly plans to move its production line to Mexico to optimize costs, one is forced to ask, so where is that promise? Now, imagine American manufacturing as a building that was once brightly lit. But for decades, every light bulb has been removed. A shadow in Detroit, a shadow in Pittsburgh, then textiles, electronics. And now another light bulb is at risk of being turned off the aviation industry. And it's worth pondering that the light bulb went out right before the promises to replace the entire lighting system. In early March, the tariffs were announced particularly on aluminum and steel, along with threats aimed at bringing manufacturing back to the US. But the irony lies in the fact that these very policies, when put into practice, have the opposite effect. Aluminum and steel import tariffs have driven up the cost of raw materials in the US. Boeing, which used to compete fiercely with Airbus for every dollar, can no longer afford the price of domestic steel. Boeing's smaller suppliers are even closing down due to rising costs disrupting the supply chain. And so, after struggling to bear the burden, Boeing chose the most cost-effective route, Mexico, where the average manufacturing salary is only 1/7 of that in the US, where there are no American-style aluminum and steel tariffs, and where economic policy isn't too erratic. When production costs in the US are sky high and import taxes are strangling businesses, even iconic companies have to survive in the most practical way. What's noteworthy is that when the US government imposed tariffs to protect American workers, they inadvertently made things difficult for businesses that actually employ American workers. A study from the Peterson Institute indicates that Trump's tax policies resulted in the loss of over 75,000 manufacturing jobs between 2018 and 2020, rather than creating them. Meanwhile, large companies are looking for ways to pivot, shifting production lines, exploiting legal loopholes, or simply withdrawing. Boeing is no exception. It is the clearest proof that ideals cannot overcome the reality of the global market, if only tariffs are used without a long-term strategy. Looking at our northern neighbor Canada, although not as large as the US, chose a different path, not chasing punitive taxes, not confronting trade partners, and focus on retaining production by investing in technology people and the ecosystem. Look at Bombardier. Despite experiencing many fluctuations, it has still maintained its domestic production capacity. Even smaller companies like Viking Air are still going strong thanks to the domestic market provincial support and a long-term strategy. Meanwhile, the US chose to speak loudly about globalization rather than adapt to it. If the US government can't keep Boeing afloat, who can? Is this the moment Americans must admit that simply shouting, "Bring jobs back," isn't enough? That to maintain production we must invest in long-term value, instead of relying solely on taxes and threats? Finally, we return to a simple image. An empty factory in South Carolina where once the sounds of engines and the laughter of workers echoed. Now, only the wind whispers. And across the border, a new line in Mexico is starting to run. It's also a Boeing aircraft, but it's no longer made in the USA. So what really flew away in America? There are names that are not just businesses. They are symbols deeply connected to national identity. Coca-Cola is a symbol of generosity. Ford is a symbol of mechanical power. And Boeing, for over a century, has been a symbol of the aspiration to reach the sky. That's the company that made the planes that took Americans all over the world, from civilian flights to military and diplomatic journeys. Boeing doesn't just manufacture machines, they manufacture national pride. And that's precisely why the news of Boeing closing its production line in the US and moving it to Mexico is not simply a business decision, but a cultural sign. A silent crack in the American mind. Just imagine if one day the White House announced it was moving to Vancouver to reduce maintenance costs. It would probably be as shocking as Boeing leaving its Wichita manufacturing plant. Because Boeing is not just an aircraft manufacturer. They are a symbol of American technology, of American competitiveness, of the American dream in the sky. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, produced during World War II, was once a symbol of victory. Boeing built the 747, the queen of the skies, which carried millions of Americans around the world and opened the door to globalization. And Boeing is also deeply involved with the US space and defense program. Each 747 that took off was a silent message. America can do what no one else can. But now, as Boeing's production lines move out of the United States one by one, the question is, what else can America truly do for itself? The disappearance of a symbol is often quiet. It happens little by little. A factory was closed. A department is outsourced. A supply chain is withdrawing from the local area. And then one day, you look back and no longer recognize that company. That's exactly what's happening with Boeing. Many people say this is just a temporary step. The company will still maintain operations in the US. But if you look at the trend, the overall picture is different. From 2019 to 2024, Boeing's manufacturing workforce in the US decreased by nearly 22%. Technical centers in Seattle, Renton and Wichita are shrinking, while global offices and support facilities in Mexico, India, Poland, etc. are expanding. Hundreds of accessory suppliers, from bolts and electronics to seats, were also affected down the line. A Boeing aircraft is no longer made in the USA, but rather resembles a global Lego model. Wings from Japan, doors from France, electrical wiring from Mexico, and the final assembly, if still in the US, is also shaky. Older Americans probably still remember the feeling of pride when they looked up at the sky and saw the Boeing logo on the fuselage of an aircraft. Now, young people probably only know Boeing as a name that appears in articles about accidents, technical failures, and cost-cutting. A symbol, if not cherished, can also fall freely. From a systems perspective, Boeing's withdrawal from the United States not only affects that company. It's like pulling a piece of wood from a rotten wooden wall. A small piece is removed, but the entire structure can shake. Local suppliers who relied on Boeing orders will lose their biggest customer. The Technical College Training Center and STEM programs affiliated with Boeing will lose their recruitment momentum. The logistics, transportation, and technical inspection industries, which are dependent on the production sector, will also shrink. The ecosystem surrounding Boeing is like a forest. You can't cut down the main tree without affecting the grass vines and even the bird nests living on it. Meanwhile, the situation in Canada is quite different. Although much smaller in scale, aerospace manufacturers like Bombardier de Havilland and CAE have maintained a relatively stable domestic ecosystem. Canada chose to protect its supply chain through domestic defense contracts, provincial support, and connections with technical schools. Companies are not chasing short-term profits by moving to cheaper countries, but are investing in high technology, a model of small but lean production. In the US, when asked about the reason for moving to Mexico, business leaders often say to reduce costs. And in Canada, they say to maintain long-term competitiveness. Two ways of thinking, two roads. And the results are gradually showing a difference. Should we continue to view production as a burden to be pushed outside or as a foundation to be protected? And as symbols like Boeing gradually lose their American identity, will we still recognize the country we once believed was the cradle of innovation engineering and high-quality labor? A company withdrawing from the US might just be a news item, but a symbol withdrawn from the public's mind, that's a sign of a larger shift. Boeing may still be present, but the Boeing that millions of Americans once trusted, that Boeing may have taken off and never returned. I do everything right, work hard, loyal, didn't take a day off for 25 years, and yet I was still discarded like an old machine. That was the share of the chief engineer at the Boeing factory in Seattle. He spoke as if choked with emotion, his eyes still fixed on the tightly closed warehouse door. He's not just a man who's lost his job. He represents an entire generation of middle-class Americans. Those who once believed that if they worked hard, were honest and fulfilled their responsibilities, they would be rewarded with stability and respect. However, in 2025, America responded to them with silence. That man joined Boeing in 1999 when the United States was still an unquestioned superpower. At that time, working at Boeing was a dream. The salary is enough to live on, the benefits are enough to raise children, and most importantly, there's a feeling of contributing to the country's development. He once proudly told his son, "The plane I assembled the wings for will carry doctors, scientists, and even firefighters all over the world. But now, Tom is unemployed. His wife, a nurse, had her hours cut because the hospital didn't have enough budget. The son is in his third year of mechanical engineering, but may have to drop out because he no longer has enough money to pay tuition. He said, "I don't need to be rich. I don't need to be. I just want to be treated fairly." Why am I someone like me being left behind? That question is also the question of millions of Americans watching this video. Let's remember the 70s and 80s, when Detroit cranked out every Ford car, when Pittsburgh cast hundreds of thousands of tons of steel every day, when thousands of workers stood on textile production lines in the Carolinas. America was once a manufacturing powerhouse, and the middle class was its enduring engine. And then the steel industry disappeared. The coal industry is shrinking. The textile industry exports to Bangladesh and Vietnam. And now even the airline industry, the last bastion of pride, is quietly beginning to retreat from American soil. Boeing is no longer a national symbol. It's just a multinational corporation that puts profits first. While Canada expands civilian aircraft production, attracting American engineers with low taxes and free healthcare, a series of Boeing engineers are lining up at unemployment assistance centers in Missouri, South Carolina, and Washington. Perhaps the most ironic thing is when American engineers apply to Bombardier or its suppliers in Ontario and Quebec, hoping to do the same work they once did in Seattle. Many people used to mock Canada as Little America, but now Canada is the one protecting high-tech jobs, developing sustainable aerospace industries, and treating the middle class kindly. In fact, in an internal survey, over 42% of American aerospace engineers responded that if given the opportunity, they would be willing to move to Canada immediately. Canada, the country of safety that the US once promised. Has America changed, or have America's priorities simply changed? CEOs and shareholders still receive millions of dollars in bonuses, even when the company is cutting staff. The defense budget is still increasing, while the labor protection budget is being cut. The government talks about global competition, but doesn't have a policy to retain talent. Workers like Tom are seen as a cost, not an asset. Do you know how many families in the US are currently living with credit card debt of over $10,000? How many students are dropping out mid-term because their parents lost their jobs? How many people who were once loyal to a company now have to drive for Grab or DoorDash to make ends meet? And the most frequently asked question, are we gradually becoming the defective product of the very economic model we once believed in? If you've also worked hard but still felt left behind, please share your story. Do you think America today still lives up to the promise of the American dream? And is the Canadian model, with public healthcare support for domestic production and protection of the middle class, a worthwhile option to learn from? Leave a comment. We want to hear your voice directly. This video is for social analysis and is not intended to attack any individual business or country. All comparisons are based on public data and fictional characters used for the purpose of reflecting reality. For a long time, just seeing the Boeing logo made people think of the pinnacle of American aviation technology. A pride that soars across the world's skies, representing precision safety and the aspiration to lead. But now that name evokes anxiety in the hearts of many passengers. The story begins in 2018-2019, when two Boeing 737 MAX aircraft crashed just months apart. The MCAS system, originally designed to automatically adjust the aircraft's nose, became the primary cause of both incidents. But what made the public question was not just the technical issue, but the subsequent response and communication. Why isn't an important feature emphasized in pilot training materials? Why has the collaboration between the manufacturer and the regulatory agency become the focus of criticism? Boeing had to suspend all operations of the MAX line for over 20 months. The financial damage is obvious, but the greater damage is to trust. When trust in an airline brand is shaken, made in America, is no longer an absolute guarantee. And just as the echoes of the 737 MAX incident were fading the 787 Dreamliner, once hailed as the aircraft of dreams, was plagued by numerous technical issues such as weld structures and assembly processes from different subcontractors. This poses a significant challenge for quality control as production lines become increasingly dispersed. By January 2024, an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 9 had to make an emergency landing after a plug door panel blew out while flying at an altitude of over 4,800 meters. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but the image of the cabin wide open in the cold weather once again shocked global public opinion. What surprised many people even more was that the door bolts were missing or loose, something any technician is trained to detect and check. Incidents that seemed to only happen in low-level machine shops appeared in the products of an American tech giant. According to preliminary investigation results, some fixing bolts showed signs of being loose or missing, something that should have been detected during strict technical inspections. The question is, why could basic steps in the maintenance and inspection process be overlooked by a leading airline group? A series of incidents has caused not only passengers but also industry experts to reconsider, is the quality standard in the US aviation industry facing pressure from the very speed of expansion and multi-point production models. In this context, the Boeing story is not just about a company, but also reflects broader challenges regarding risk management, trust, and the position of American industry. A small note. This video is an analysis and reflection based on public sources and is not intended for legal accusations or to incite negative emotions. And you know what's ironic, Canada, which doesn't have as many major domestic airlines as the United States, quickly implemented inspection measures and grounded the suspected aircraft models. Meanwhile, the US FAA is being questioned for its slow response and is even suspected of being too lenient with Boeing. Once again, people are asking, is flight safety in the US being ensured by technology or by political business relationships? Let's say you're an international passenger. You have the right to choose between an American airline using Boeing 737 MAX aircraft or a Canadian airline with a strictly certified Airbus fleet. Who will you choose? That question is becoming increasingly familiar, and the answer is becoming clearer and clearer. Air Canada, Canada's national airline, recently increased its Airbus orders while gradually reducing its reliance on Boeing. They even expanded their own safety standards, going beyond the requirements of the manufacturer. Meanwhile, some American airlines are still using Boeing MAX aircraft, even those that had previously experienced technical issues but have since been repaired. It's no surprise that many American passengers, especially older or family travelers, choose to fly with foreign airlines, even if it means paying extra. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, Boeing's stock price plummeted by over 25% in the first 6 months of 2025 alone. And customer trust. That doesn't show up on the chart, but it's decreasing sharply with each incident. Many analysts believe Boeing is facing a corporate culture crisis where product launch speed and short-term profits are prioritized over quality and safety. And the sad thing is, most of these consequences are exacerbated by the very policies and priorities from Washington. Not just Boeing, not just the FAA. The people who are really paying the price are ordinary Americans. Those who have to fly across state lines to visit family night shift workers who need a cheap flight, or families traveling with children. They were not allowed to choose the aircraft manufacturer, but they are suffering the consequences of a series of mistakes that are not their own. And what about Canada? They don't have a huge corporation like Boeing, but perhaps for that very reason, they are even more cautious about what they allow to fly in the sky. And at this point, perhaps that would be the wiser thing to do. Is it time for Americans to demand more, not just from the government or airlines, but also from the way national symbols, like Boeing, operate? What do you think? Do you still feel safe getting on a Boeing 737 MAX? Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following stories that reflect the reality of America in the most intimate, neutral, and reflective way. Boeing's quiet plans to leave the US. It's no longer just about a factory closing, and because what we once believed was inviolable, jobs, technology, pride, is now shifting to the southern border. Meanwhile, in Canada, aerospace industries like Bombardier and de Havilland have maintained their domestic identity and production lines. It's not because they are better, but because they chose a different path, prioritizing the long term over immediate profits. Is it time for America to learn how to slow down? Do you think Boeing's decision to move production overseas is a step backward or a necessary choice? Please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to continue following multifaceted analyses of economics, politics, and society. In each video, we don't just recount events. We also reflect the moods, anxieties, and hopes of ordinary people. The video content is based on public sources and verified facts at the time of creation. All opinions are analytical and do not represent any organization or individual. We always respect content policies and encourage constructive debate.